Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Roompact's ResEdChat podcast. If you're new to the show, every episode we feature a variety of topics of interest to hired professionals who work in and with university housing, residence life, residential education, whatever you might call it. All are welcome. So for today's episode, we are continuing, if you're following along, our string of episodes with the Roompact writers for this year, annual program that Roompact does to kind of bring in a variety of different voices and perspectives. And I know if you've also been following along with all the episodes that ResEdChat has been putting out, we do have frequent RA chat episodes, which are really cool. And this will be a treat for me because I usually don't do those episodes. I usually don't talk to the RAs, but I was an RA a while back, and so this will be kind of just a little bit of a a mix up for me, I guess, in just in terms of the usual folks that I talk to, but continuing a really cool tradition, I think that we've been able to do in the podcast here. So we will start out though, as we always do, have our guest briefly introduce themselves. But in your case, Colin, we'll have you kind of just talk a little bit about how you became an RA.
So, hello, my name is Colin Varnet. I go to the University of Connecticut. I am a senior molecular and cell biology major, and I'm an RA. How I became an RA was probably the stereotypical story that everybody does. I saw an application on a flyer on the wall and was like, that sounds cool. Wouldn't mind having a free room. You know what I mean? So I applied for that, and next thing you know, next year I was in the thick of it.
Well, I think that is what's interesting though, is like that obviously is a story shared by many. It's just a sort of like stumbling upon it, and maybe that idea of like, oh yeah, I get like a free room or single room or whatever, like that being like I guess on its face enough to like compel certain people to get into it, but then like, okay, why do you stick with it or kind of push through with it and everything? But yeah, those sort of like humble beginnings. It's like, yeah, obviously, like a lot of institutions need a lot of RAs. They can't have obviously all the sort of like people who like maybe out from the outset are like completely bought into the entirety of all the kind of complex, nuanced nature, of the role and everything. But and I guess clarify for me, how long have you been an RA?
I want to start by saying you're absolutely right. It's like the little honeypot that leads you in, but then eventually you find like a more compelling reason, which is obviously why I've stuck with it because this is my third year. Um, so clearly there's more to it, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, well, because I think for me, and I think probably maybe second to the just sort of like stumbling upon it, yeah, the pot of gold or pot of honey, pot of gold, maybe, whatever that entices people. For me, like I never considered it, but my RA kind of tapped me on the shoulder because I'd like attended events or something. They did like certain like video game events that I like helped with, and like I brought like extra controllers and different things. And like, so I think that idea of like, hey, you're involved, you like community, you like being a part of things, like, I think there's like a good chunk of like, they try to, uh, encourage current RAs to like, hey, if you have sort of people that you think might be good for it, that is the nut where like, okay, you tap somebody on the shoulder, you say, hey, I think you'd be a good fit for this. You might get a lot out of it, or whatever else, and that pushes them along. Where like I wasn't as motivated necessarily by like any of those other like perks and things. So I think yeah, I think those in my mind, I guess like my sort of mental math is like those are probably like the top two ways that people get into it. But yeah, regardless, I think you being an RA, for 3 years, being invested in the experience, obviously you bring a lot of that insight and everything into being a Roompact writer, which I will say, I guess, as far as I'm aware, most of our writers have not been current RAs. So I think that's part of it. Again, like we want to bring, folks onto the show, onto the blog, and everything else that are bringing different perspectives. So I guess just walk through a little bit, talking about your experience being a Roompact writer, but start, I guess, similarly of like, how did you even become a writer? Because I feel like probably a lot of your peers would have been like intimidated or think that it doesn't apply to them or whatever else. So kind of talk us through that journey and then like what the experience has been like over this past year.
So you're absolutely right. And it doesn't apply to an RA. So I actually applied completely on accident. And by that was probably a lack of my own ability to fully read a description of the posting, where it was meant for more higher ed professionals. And I was reading it. I was working one night on a whim. I was like, oh, cool. That sounds like something I wouldn't mind doing. So I wrote like this little audition piece about the role of like the residence hall director. And I get an email a couple weeks later saying, hey, you weren't necessarily who this was geared towards. However, we would like to maybe potentially work with you in the future to get more of an RA's perspective. So I thought that was a little interesting. It was a little embarrassing at first, but I'm glad it happened overall because my experience has been very productive, I feel. Um, Not even necessarily as an RA, but I feel like it just like professional writing space, the collaboration space. I think it's been a very nice way to get a different side of the coin, a different perspective on a lot of the issues that you'd face in ResEd.
Yeah, I think that's for me so much about like embracing kind of wholeheartedly uh certainly for like for institutions the idea of like content creation, like all these sort of like new things that are coming out of like esports or whatever else. Like, people might sort of scoff and be like, oh, what good is that? You're just doing this, sort of fluffy or sort of frivolous thing or whatever. But it's like, no, like you can earnestly build some really great skills no matter what you do. The idea of being able to communicate ideas clearly and concisely in a compelling way and all that. It's like, yeah, you don't have to be like going down that route because I want to be a full-time content creator or whatever. It's just like it is a valuable experience and not, kind of writing people off, I guess, if that's not the path that they want. Because I think a lot, as somebody who's played video games my whole life, it's like loving seeing that, like the maturation of that space. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's essentially like, much like any other sport or something. Like there's a lot of different paths and everything like that. So like however you come to something, looking at it as an opportunity to learn and grow and develop, and even with like molecular biology and whatever else, it's like I will still have to work with other people and like do things that will probably involve these skills or whatever else, or maybe it'll always be something that you do on the side or freelance or whatever else. Because I think like I couldn't imagine myself ever being like a full time like writer or anything like that. But through being a writer freelance and doing stuff with like podcasts and everything, it's really been helpful for me over the years. So I can definitely get that. And I know I think, yeah, I mean, just sort of the happy accident, I guess, and just knowing, through like the podcast and other means, Roompact's been putting out a lot more content oriented towards RAs, like kind of for RAs, by RAs, or just really understanding that uh student staff are an important component of the greater kind of residential education uh kind of initiative and ecosystem of everything. So I think even if it's not for RAs by RAs, it's at least just being like, hey, like you work with these people, let's like build content around that to help support them and make their jobs as effective as possible. But um and the one thing that when I was kind of skimming through the pieces that you have written, or kind of things that you're interested in, one thing that stood out to me that I thought would be interesting to kind of bring into the space as somebody who's kind of on the front lines is the idea of residential students experiencing kind of homesickness and, kind of like, I think this fits in broadly with kind of like culture shock to an extent because it could be for a domestic student, it could be for an international student for, very different reasons. But kind of at the core of it is like you feel homesick, like you're in a new environment, new people, new routines, and all that kind of stuff. So, I'll start off with kind of the broad question: how, from your experience, your perspective, can RAs identify these students who may be experiencing homesickness?
Yeah, I think homesickness is a very important issue to look at. Um, and for my first 2 years as an RA, I worked in primarily first year housing. My second year, I especially worked with a lot of international students. So there's a lot of different flavors to homesickness where some people are in a completely foreign place for the first time. And it's a lot of cultural adaptation, it's a lot of trying to figure out like brand new friends. They don't know anybody, it's hard to communicate. Whereas other people, this is their first time away from home. They've never experienced having to live solely with their peers and not having that support system to fall back on. So a lot of it has to come from a sense of like personal experience. When I remember thinking about my first time leaving home and how that made me feel. And when I was feeling homesick, I isolated myself a little bit. So, identifying students who may or may not appear as if they're isolating themselves, or doing occasional check ins, ask them that question up front, be honest. Like, how do you feel being away from home? And encourage them that it's okay if they're not feeling 100% happy go lucky about their new college experience.
Yeah, that's what I think. Those are pretty just clear, simple pieces of advice is like the folks who aren't engaging, and it's like, yeah, that idea of that kind of daunting, kind of overwhelming feeling of like all those things, happening at once. In addition to obviously just like you have to still be a student and do all the, like, and it's just like, okay, like I'm just trying to get by here and I can't even fathom, kind of trying to climb up that very daunting hill of, really feeling at home and integrating and like I can be myself. I don't have to like just like assimilate or, whatever else. But even that idea of like, having RAs as those frontline uh kind of support people, like just being very direct and asking like, like, hey, I know you're like, because even that idea of like you're like in a different part of the country, it could be like it doesn't feel like maybe it should be like so disruptive, but like if you're coming from New England to like the American South, it's like that probably will feel just kind of just a little odd, like everything just a little bit, just enough to feel a little bit kind of knocking you off your balance and routine and everything. So I think just, yeah, being very clear, because I think uh, it is that idea of, the pleasantries of just being like, "Hey, how you doing?" Everybody's gonna be like, "Oh, I'm doing all right. I'm doing good, whatever." But just being like, "Yeah, I know you're from, from away. Like, how you feel like you're integrating in? You feeling like homesick at all, or whatever?" They might just be like, just like really clearly trying to open the door to that conversation. Like it's such a simple thing and a simple piece of advice, but I think just making sure that, uh, yeah, folks feel like they can um, initiate that conversation. And obviously, like that student needs to be like kind of ready and willing to have it at that time. But I think that is like a really good strategy. And I guess I'll ask sort of a brief follow up. I guess just from your experience, certainly like the social isolation is one component of like why it is important to try to bridge this gap with these students. Because like, okay, if you're never coming out of your room, like things are not likely to get better or not as quickly as they should or could if you're isolating yourself. But like from your perspective, like why is so important to like identify these students and try to reach out to them and kind of help get them to be more uh, integrated and kind of not feeling so homesick.
Again, if you're isolating yourself, you're not going out and experiencing new experiences that are on like the good side of moving to a new college campus. You're not making new friends as efficiently. So, being the RA, and it is your primary responsibility to support your residents and have resources for them. Understanding which resources you need to be able to give them is the critical first step. So if somebody is saying, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm feeling a little lonely or I'm feeling a little isolated," being able to say, "Oh, okay, have you looked at," and then you show them the list of all the clubs and organizations on campus. You look at, "Oh, there's this social event happening on this day at this time at this place. You should totally go." And be able to support them that way by giving them ways that they can branch out and break out of their shell a little bit before it becomes more of a significant problem than it already is.
Yeah, I mean that's another good strategy. Yeah, of just being very uh, I guess it's like part of it is like not assuming, but then also just being very direct in the same way of like you might ask somebody kind of more pointedly a question, just be like, well, here are the things, like here's stuff that's going on. And I know sometimes people, depending on kind of your style or your vibe, might be like, hey, I'm going, you want to come with me? Or like, you'll see me there. Like if that's sort of like will help kind of smooth the, kind of the rails there and everything. But I think it's like, what makes this so important is like, I think, you reach out to these students and I think you do just have to like try to get through that kind of inertia and then like build the momentum of like, okay, like it's not as hard as you think it's going to be, or it's not as bad as you think it's going to be, getting out there and feeling like you're kind of integrating, trying new things and getting out of your comfort zone and all of that. Like, I think it sort of begets itself, if you try to start to motivate and inspire people to do that. And, uh, the higher professionals listening, know that idea of just sort of like the more socially integrated somebody is, the more they kind of have that safety net, the more likely they are to kind of persist and succeed and just not have it feel like such a like kind of rough and bumpy road, like I think it sometimes it's even just like, well, it's the right thing because like people are more satisfied. It's not even like any of these sort of like high-arching kind of quantitative like, oh, we want to improve our retention rates or this or that the other thing. It's like, yes, that is important, but how you get there is that people are just having a more pleasant and enjoyable experience in college. Like it should be fun. It should be, engaging. It should feel like you know people. You're in a friendly space and all those sort of things. So I think there's a lot of reasons why it's important. And there's a lot of, I think, strategies depending on kind of where the person's at. Like it could be like trying to kind of smoother getting them out and meeting people, or making kind of direct like introductions where it's like, hey, well, actually, there's somebody the floor above or below that also is from California, and here we are in New York, and like they'll maybe just be able to like uh, I don't know, just kind of share the same kind of background experience and everything. But it could be like utilizing counseling services or whatever else. If it's just like, okay, like this is uh something more kind of severe, pervasive, like, and it can be kind of either or both, or whatever else. I think it's just really at least starting that conversation is probably the primary strategy, because then that informs you as like the RA or anybody else to kind of like, okay, I think this is going to be more or less helpful, and that sort of thing. But I guess with all of that, like there's a variety of strategies, there's a variety of reasons why this work is important, but it is not simple and clean. It is not just always going to just be kind of paint by numbers here. So like in your experience, like what are challenges that come with this? Like what are some things that have been, I guess, difficult, and I guess how have you tried to overcome them?
Absolutely. So the starting challenge, which is probably the most expectable one, is that some people don't want to talk to you. Some people are not social. And it's okay that some people are not social. And a lot of the time, you have to kind of infer their boundaries. So if somebody seems a little standoffish, don't necessarily be as pressing and extroverted as you would for another resident, but still be there as a support, still offer them resources. Um, Another thing that I found to be a little successful was I would send out an interest form and just ask people, what are your interests? What do you like to do? And try to plan, especially at the beginning of the first semester, try to plan a lot of my social events around that. Like, oh, somebody's super interested in Super Smash Bros. So we're going to do a Super Smash Bros. Night in the lounge. Or this other person really loves playing volleyball. So we'll host a little volleyball tournament for the floor. So things like that, where it's not overtly telling them to come and do something, but trying to entice them with something that they find enjoyable, I think is a great way to subvert that. As far as other challenges go, I know that it's sometimes difficult for people to find friends even when you're looking at their types of interests. So, finding other ways for students to connect, you can look at social media platforms, which a lot of people I know, as soon as they go to school, they all add every single person they can think of on Instagram. Um, Encouraging them to reach out and try to be a little bit extroverted, remind them that it's an uncomfortable process sometimes, but the results and the rewards are always far more benefiting.
Yeah, I think that like those are two good challenges that you noted. Like that idea that like uh one, you may be kind of just like kind of going in uh into the dark, I guess, and kind of into the fog of war of just sort of being like, I assume everybody likes the things that I like. And it's like that would be like a challenge where it's just like, man, like nobody's engaging, nobody's coming out or whatever else. So like trying to get that interest, and then even that idea that like that people may feel um like it's difficult when you are, I'm trying to like frame this in the right way, but like not like calling them out and be like, well, you should go do this thing over there or whatever else. You're just being like, hey, call out to everybody. We're doing like, yeah, just like a broad thing for everybody, like which is informed by people's interests. But like, so that like hopefully that resonates. Hopefully it's like, the right time, right place kind of thing. But um that it is sort of a group outing. It is not like, hey, you person, go out to this thing alone or whatever. It's like, oh, it's all my neighbors on the floor. Or it's all, like it's just trying to like ease those barriers to entry. I think is a good way to kind of circumvent that challenge. But then even that idea that some people, especially initially, what I've always loved is like if you use something like Discord or Slack or yeah, like social media, whatever else, whatever your platform of choice is, like that can be the initial catalyst for people to kind of chatter, get to know each other, share interests, and like they may say like, hey, well, we're all going to go get dinner, who wants to join, or we're going to go to this event or something. And those sort of digital interactions and engagement in communities then sort of inform and empower the in-person community. So I think that's been always really helpful to see, because I think, yeah, like it's even the acknowledgement, I feel like, is the idea is like, it's awkward. That's a challenge. But you know what? It's awkward for everybody. Like, this is like, some people, yes, they are just like gregarious social butterflies, whatever, but like, they're at least just, I think, probably like able to acknowledge and circumvent or overcome the awkwardness like much more easily, or kind of like, flow with the energy, whatever they're getting with people, and, keep on going. But like, yeah, just that idea that like it can be at least like kind of the first small step to be like, okay, yeah, I've added people on Instagram or whatever else, and like you're commenting, you're engaging, you're, messaging, you're sort of doing all those sort of things. And it's like, yeah, that is a step like that and sort of honor that and all that. So I guess, have you seen maybe like sort of that digital component really kind of come into play here as sort of like just another tool to kind of harness? Like, I don't know if you've done anything or have you just seen it be effective for others?
No, absolutely. And I think that's something that's not really acknowledged or talked about as much is obviously this is a generation that's growing up now with so much technology at our fingertips at all points. Um, and while it's not the same for everybody, I think I've seen so many people meet their best friends because they found them on Instagram over the summer and we're like, oh, hey, do you want a room together? Or like allowing people to just, you can look around for people that you might be friends with without having that initial awkward reaction of having to actually speak with them up front. And a lot of people feel more comfortable reaching out if they know, oh, it's just through a phone at first. But like, if I actually like this person and we want to hang out and be friends, then we're going to the same school. So we'll just meet up and say hi.
Yeah. Cause I think it's like, I mean, especially like coming out of the pandemic, I think like some people were just kind of like, I don't know, like they kind of just overdid it, like they just kind of like want to give kind of some space to sort of all the digital interactions and everything, or the perception that they're like two completely separate things. Like there's still, I think, kind of a stubborn kind of notion that like, the digital world and the real world like aren't kind of, intertwined, which of course they are tightly intertwined. So I think like, and I guess even like the other thing that my brain is just going is like like the notion from the institutional perspective is that like they want to like own everything or monitor everything, but like even that idea of like, okay, maybe like have your own channels where you like bring everybody together, and then like, yeah, that's the way that somebody could like look through everybody in the Facebook group to like friend on Instagram, whatever, and then like they're going to go and scatter and have their own conversations privately, not under the prying eyes of like the institution, but like, yeah, at least kind of maybe like model the way or kind of like give that sort of initial impetus, sort of opportunity for students to have those digital interactions. But yeah, it can be so informative and so sort of helpful to build a sort of camaraderie and even just like, you know, uh, yeah, just have that chance for sort of like the best of both worlds where like there's kind of the asynchronous, like kind of self-paced nature of like Discord and Slack where it's like, yeah, like catch up when you can. Like everybody's kind of chattering in there and you can chime in or not, or whatever. And that, yeah, obviously you can do like the private chats and everything, but like that can just help people to, yeah, be like, hey, well, we're all here. Like if you want to like grab lunch or dinner, like just let me know. And that's just the mechanism, and people would likely do that, which ends up at the positive outcome we're looking for to alleviate, homesickness and everything else versus like, it's like, yeah, it's like, it's tough. Like, I'm going to go knock on your door. Maybe like not initially, like that's a tall order for people, cause it's like, obviously why, like you drive up to somebody's house, you like text them, be like, hey, I'm here. Cause it's like, I don't know, knocking or doorbell. Like it feels intrusive, I guess. I don't know. We will wrap it up here though. I'll give you the opportunity if there are, resources or just kind of final bits of advice, kind of final thoughts that you have on this topic, reflections, whatever else, take this as you will, but wrap it up for us. Just final advice for RAs out there on this issue.
My last big piece of advice that I could give to anybody would be start as early as possible. Like, especially after moving in, RAs move in early, they go through some sort of summer training. The back to school effect kind of subdues for them. But remember, for a lot of people who come in during moving, like this is their first time ever here. So having to maintain that high energy all the way through, before classes get difficult, before exams start coming up, just go hardcore, for the lack of a better term, right at the beginning and say, here, like, hi, I'm the RA. How can I help you? And then start working on introductions and social events and getting your floor super engaged at the beginning so that you can take more of a relaxed seat as things move along by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, because that's what I think is like with communities, like at a certain point, like shouldn't have to be doing it all. Like they should be wanting to like do stuff themselves, and you can be supportive of that, being like, yeah, I'll help, like pay for the food or whatever else, like, but yeah, I think that initial front loaded approach will help address the potential for homesickness. Don't sort of like be reactionary, be proactive, and try to uh yeah, just kind of prime the pump to make sure that, um, because there can be like real lasting effects if it's just like, oh yeah, my first semester is really hard and I like flunked out of a class or to drop it or whatever. It's like, hopefully, like we avoid that as much as possible. Like we'd want to have people feel like they're getting that smooth, strong start and feel confident, moving on through their whole academic journey and everything. So, obviously, yeah, RAs and the folks who work with them and support them have an important role in helping to support all the residents at your institution to be uh, feeling as least homesick as possible. Um, but appreciate you for kind of writing and thinking on this and for jumping on and talking about it. And yeah, just appreciate you being part of the Roompact blogging team. So yeah, just thanks for hanging out.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.